สวัสดีท่านแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะขอต้อนรับทุกท่านได้เข้าสู่งาน Sustainability Expo 2023 ค่ะดิฉันสวัยฉัตรกุลชรนิตยาชีวแพทย์รับหน้าที่เป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการนะคะและต่อจากนี้ค่ะเราจะเข้าสู่ Session National Geographic Impact Storytelling นะคะแต่ว่าก่อนอื่นวัตถุประสงค์การจัดงานในครั้งนี้เนี่ยนะคะก็เป็นการสร้างความตระหนักรู้และความเข้าใจของการพัฒนาอย่างยั่งยืนของสังคมวงกว้างนะคะเพื่อให้ทุกคนนั้นมีความมุ่งมั่นที่จะลงมือปฏิบัติจริงสร้างความร่วมมือจากทุกภาคส่วนนะคะเพื่อให้ได้ผลลัพธ์ที่เป็นรูปธรรมนะคะ Welcome all of you to Sustainability Expo 2023 that aims to raise awareness about sustainability development. Now our next session is a very special topic, National Geographic Impact Storytelling.You should have agreed with me that photography and films are also forms of art. It's often a part of storytelling, especially in its digital form. But how will National Geographic tell a story about sustainability development? Let us all find out. Today, we are very honored to have with us Kun Caitlin Yarnall, Chief Storytelling Officer, National Geographic, as well as Anand Varma, photographer, National Geographic Explorer. So let's meet our moderator, Kun Melati Weisen, a Utopia founder, National Geographic Explorer.
Oh, shit. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a huge honor for me to be the host and moderator of today's session. As you may have heard, my name is Melati. I'm 22 years old and a full-time changemaker.I'm excited about the session on impact storytelling with Caitlin Yarnall and Anand Varma. As a young changemaker, I know and believe in the power of storytelling. And as a young changemaker, I know that a lot of the storytelling happens in classrooms. But if we look at some of the classrooms today, most of them still unfortunately look like this. But growing up on the island of Bali, my classroom looked like this. I was surrounded by this natural wonder of the natural world, and the curiosity was there. But my classrooms also looked like this. Plastic pollution was everywhere, and that set me off at the age of 12 years old on a journey of exploration, answering one big question. Together with my 10-year-old sister, we asked,What are we going to do about it? And that set us off without a business plan, without a strategy, but with a vision and a story that we wanted everybody to believe in. A world that we could picture using the tool of storytelling to reach it. And so, before we go into the next session of impact storytelling, I wanted to throw it back to the audience and get a feeling of the room. Who here, and raise your hand,Who here already feels like a storyteller? Do we have storytellers in the room? Raise your hand. Higher so I can see it up on this massive stage. All right, and for those of you that didn't put your hand up, who here after today's session or out of this session would like to learn how to be an impact storyteller?Yes, so we see a sea of hands, and this is the right session for you because we're going to be hearing directly from the frontline experiences of National Geographic photographer Anand Varma. But before that, we get to hear a recording and a virtual talk from Caitlin Yarnall, the Chief Storytelling Officer. I know, how cool of a title is that? From National Geographic Society. And she sends her apologies for not being here in person, but she'll explain in the video her message and her reasoning of the importance of stories. And after that, Anand Varma and I will be in a discussion where we want to share a little bit more and hear his journey on storytelling. So without further ado, let's hear from Caitlin Yarnall.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank you again for inviting me to be there with you today. Unfortunately, I can't be...COVID is still very real, and so I've been stuck at home and not able to travel because of COVID. I'm feeling better, and I just really, really hope that next year when this group is assembled, I can be there with you in person. But I was asked to record a little bit of what I would have shared with you today, and so I'm just going to dive right in. My name is Caitlin Yarnall. I'm the Chief Storytelling Officer at National Geographic, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about the power of story and why storytelling matters. So I'm going to start first with the story of National Geographic. National Geographic Society was founded in 1888 in Washington, D.C. Here are some of our illustrious founders. You see, it was started as kind of a club of men who wanted to explore the world. They wanted to go out into the world, make discoveries. Of course, we understand discovery differently in 2023 as we did in 1888, but they then wanted to share their discoveries with the world. So they developed a little thing called the National Geographic magazine that talked about the people that they funded and the expeditions that they did, and the rest, as they say, is history. Fast forward a few years, and National Geographic still invests in exploration and explorers. Here are some of the most iconic, famous explorers you might know, people like Jane Goodall and Jacques Cousteau, and some discoveries like the Titanic. While these are the iconic explorers that National Geographic has, I think what's important to know today is that we have over 13,000 explorers around the globe focusing on science, exploration, and storytelling, and education. And they still go out, we give them grants, they make discoveries, they explore the world, and they bring those stories back. And through the power of our media partner and other channels, we're able to amplify that work. So that's National Geographic's story in under 2 minutes. I'm now going to tell you my story. I grew up on the north coast of California in a place called Humboldt County. It was pretty rural and remote, and I was kind of a feral kid. I spent a lot of time outside with my dad and my sister. We fished and we backpacked, and I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wasn't one of those kids who knew from the time I was small that I wanted to be an engineer or a doctor or a chef. I knew I wanted to be outside. I knew I liked talking to people, and I knew I liked math, but I also liked art. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Fast forward a few years, I ended up in a cartography class. I loved making maps because it was the combination of art and science that my brain liked. And what I didn't have the words for then that I have the words for now was it was also a form of visual storytelling. I was telling stories. Fast forward a few years, and I was asked to come to National Geographic to work on an atlas. So there I am with my spiffy Windows 2000 computer. It was high-tech at the time. GIS couldn't be done on a Mac, so I was using a PC and making those big, beautiful pull-out maps in the magazine. I left National Geographic for a short time. I thought I might become an academic. So I went to grad school. I did a lot of field work in Bolivia. That was my house there with all of the poultry that came with it. But what I really found was while I liked academia, I liked research, I liked publishing, really storytelling was it for me. And so I left grad school, went back to National Geographic, and I worked at the magazine for a long time. So for 10 years, I was a creative editor, I was an executive editor, I was an art director, and I was the director of commercial maps. And that was amazing. The platform of those publications, what I was able to do were incredible. But then my journey took another twist about 8 years ago when I moved over to the nonprofit side of National Geographic. And I've been for the last 8 years figuring out how do we really do storytelling and impact storytelling in a nonprofit way. So I want to tell you a little bit about impact with storytelling, what I've learned, what science has shown us in the last few years. So why do stories matter? I think I'm hard-pressed to find people who say stories and storytelling doesn't matter, but people can't really put their finger on why. I love this quote from Joseph Campbell, and I think it is so true. Numbers, facts are forgettable, but we remember stories. And in fact, we often remember the facts that are embedded in stories. Some anthropologists actually argue that storytelling is what makes us human. Now, some whale researchers may say that whales are also telling stories, to still be yet proved or determined, but I think we can all agree that humans are unique in our ability to tell stories. Almost every culture has storytelling. It's how we remember our history. It's how we put our kids to bed. It's why jokes are funny. It's how we remember the past. Stories matter. Stories engage the brain. They engage a different part of our brain and a different part of our nervous system than facts and numbers do. They stay with us longer. They activate parts of our brain that are associated with deep memory and feelings. And so they just stick in a different way. They create emotional connections. You meet people through stories. You find universality in them. And so because of that, there are deep emotional connections, and that's why stories are so memorable. They also can simplify really complex ideas. This is part of what I did for years and years at National Geographic magazine, was take the most hairy, complex science or social science problems and simplify them into a storyline. And you can do that by expert editing. You can do it through analogy or metaphor, but they really help us tackle those big, hairy things. So I'm not going to have time today to walk through all of this. At another date, I hope I can, but the elements of a good story really matter. Character, emotion, conflict, and resolution. I'm going to touch on some of these as we go forward. Strong characters. I think everyone knows who this is. This story, Lord of the Ring, resonates because of its really strong character. And I would argue that one of the reasons that this is such a strong character is because he is relatable. He's not a superhero. We all can identify with him. He had a normal life in the Shire and got thrown into a big challenge. But at the end, he just wants to go home. So I would say, if you want to make impact with your storytelling, find a really relatable, strong character. Someone who, yes, is aspirational and yes, can do amazing things, but your audience can still connect with. Place matters. Place really matters in your story. And I find a lot of, particularly scientists, gloss over the power of place. You want to ground your audience in, where are you? What's this place like? What's it smell like? What's it feel like? Because we all know that place matters to us. Emotions. As I said before, story really evokes emotions. There's a lot of research, cognitive research, coming out of the University of Florida that shows that these are the emotions on the top that you should evoke when possible, that are the emotions that people like. You want to sit with them. You want to stick with them. And then the second set of emotions we should really use sparingly. These are emotions that, yes, they're a key part of the human experience. They're a key part of stories, but people run away from them. So while you can sprinkle them in through stories, or while you can make a quick hit with them, people aren't going to come back for more. So awe, pride, parental love, hope, try to evoke that as much as possible in your storytelling. And the research around parental love is really interesting. People don't have to be parents to really resonate with that emotion too. I'm so sorry, I'm going to skip that one. Many of you may have learned this in school. In American schools, we learned it. This is very old. This is Greek structure of storytelling. And really, we know this intrinsically. Stories need a beginning, a middle, and end. You need to develop a story. There needs to be some sort of tension and climax, and then it needs to resolve. In kids' stories, in English, we say, and they lived happily ever after. That's the resolution. Our brains from such a very young age are wired to follow this structure and to want stories to fall into this. Now, I will say that in many traditional Chinese, Japanese, and Korean narratives, this may be familiar for many in the audience, the story arc looks more like this. But I think what is universal is that there is a beginning, a middle, an end, some sort of tension or twist, and then there's resolution. I think as you're telling stories, and be they, a business pitch or a scientific theory you want to put forward, try to always fall into these three areas. I see a lot of scientists get stuck in the introduction part. They want to tell me everything about everything, the groundwork, and they never get to the tension, and then they never resolve. And you can see even in my very short introduction of myself, I introduced where I was from. I introduced a little bit of tension of, I didn't know what I wanted to be, went to grad school, I ended up coming back to National Geographic, and then it resolves. It resolves into, I found nonprofit storytelling, and here I am today. So even in the simplest stories, try to think about this structure. Now, it's, of course, more complicated. Kurt Vonnegut, who's a very famous American novelist, had this theory years ago when he was a PhD student at the University of Chicago that most stories can fall into several story arcs. Now, University of Chicago at the time said this was not acceptable for an anthropology thesis, but fast forward, and some researchers just a few years ago, now using AI and algorithms, were able to take his theory and apply it to these 6 fundamental story shapes. And so they analyzed many works of fiction and found that actually it's true. Most stories fall into these 6 arcs of narrative. Now, I'm not saying that you have to become an expert in this or that you need to go deep into it, but I think it's really important to know that our human brains have been culturally conditioned, particularly this is a Western study, but we could do it for other cultures as well, to look for stories, to place stories into arcs that make sense, that are familiar. We want to take things that are unknown and place it into a familiar construct. So I'm just going to really quickly go through some things that I would do much more in depth with you of when you are trying to tell stories, what do you want to do? First of all, I would say try to have a goal. What are you trying to achieve with your story? Everyone who's ever worked with me knows that I like to say over and over, what is the purpose and who's the audience of your story? So here's 2 examples of goals. You want to make it very specific for your audience. Eat less meat resonates much more closely with people than save the planet. So as specific as you can make with your goal is you can make your goal the better. Audience, who needs to take action to achieve your goal? If you are trying to tell this story to someone, is it the CEO of the company who has the power to take the action? Is it a groundswell movement? Think about that as you're constructing your narrative. You also want to appeal to values. Now, this is a U.S. study, again, out of the University of Florida, but I think it's pretty, I've tried this around the world and it's pretty universal. Now, I'll say this is very broad brush. Most people resonate with most of these values, but in general, if you're talking with conservative audiences, these are the things that resonate with them. They care about standards of morality and decency. They care about the in-group loyalty and a very much reverence and respect for authority and hierarchy. Liberal, oftentimes in the US, we think of this as younger generations. You can appeal much more through fairness, equality, justice, and protecting people from harm, particularly those who are more vulnerable and have less power. Again, these values are universal, they can apply, but in general, as you're thinking about your audience, this is a paradigm to think about. Character, I mentioned this before. Who do you want to choose to be the main character of your story? In my story, I chose myself because I am trying to connect with you. I can't be there in person with you, but I want you to feel like you know me a little bit. But as you're constructing a story, be it fiction or nonfiction, what story aligns with your goal? Who's the most affected, and who is your audience really going to resonate and relate to? Finally, I call this my irony slide because I've written it all down, but our brain processes visuals 60,000 times faster than text. We are primates. We have big eye sockets. We evolved to scan the horizon looking for prey and predators, and so we are visual creatures. And so if we had more time, I'd go into how to create effective visuals for your stories, but just know this science. And rather than fight against it and fill your slides with many words and try to have people read things, perhaps lean into this. Lean into the visuals. It will help you. And finally, the last thing I want to leave you with today, because I know people get hung up on this, and some of the best storytellers in the world, I put them on a stage and they freeze. I will just say public speaking is just storytelling. And if you take one thing away from this that I hope you really learn and sits with you is that public speaking is just storytelling. Speak confidently and tell a story, and your audience will love you. And so now it's my great pleasure to hand over to the incredible National Geographic explorers that are with you today. Thank you for listening to me. I wish I could be there in person, and I'll hand over to Anand. Thank you.
I think the key to creating innovative stories is to not go in with too rigid of a plan. The most interesting stories here are the ones I don't even know exist yet. And so in order to uncover the most interesting, the most compelling stories,
Oh, wow.
you have to explore. And what that means is a little bit of tinkering. It means following your own curiosity, following your own nose. It kind of lowers the stakes of your early efforts that, okay, we're here just to play and explore and see what's possible.
Oh, this is so cool. That's gonna be great. Should be fun.
Let's play, let's explore, let's learn more about impact storytelling. Over the last 2 days, I've had the extreme privilege to get to spend some more time with Anand and get to know him a little bit more through our conversations over dinner or the tech checks on this massive stage to prepare for this session for you all today. And not only is Anand an incredible and talented National Geographic photographer, or an incredibly insightful storyteller, but he is someone who puts a lot of intention into everything that he shares. So the perfect teacher for us to learn from today on impact storytelling. So let's please welcome on stage Anand Varma. Welcome,
Thank you
Anand.
so much. Thank you so much, Malati.
Yeah, I know that you're all it's very dark. We don't get to see you as much, but we know you're there. And I wanted to kick off, Anand, with telling us a little bit, did you always know you wanted to be a storyteller?
You know, that's an interesting question because this has been a very unexpected journey for me. In fact, I really started out as a kid who loved science, who loved the outdoors, and assumed that the only path for me was to become a scientist. That was the only way to live a life exploring the outdoors and learning about the natural world.
Interesting. And so when did photography then kind of kick in?
Photography for me was a little bit of an accidental discovery. So it wasn't until the end of high school that I picked up my dad's camera and I would bring it along with me on my adventures through the forest around my home. And there was one moment that I remember where my relationship to photography changed. And it was this moment where I was exploring the woods with my best friend and we found a snake in the forest. And I had this little camera and I decided to sneak up on this snake and take a picture of it. And I took this image, and it's not a particularly impressive image. You know, the image itself doesn't resonate with me, it doesn't stick with me. It's the memory of my friend's reaction to this image. Mm-hmm. I took this picture and he lost his mind with all the detail that we could see. I mean, the real snake, the thing was right there. We could have been looking at the real thing, but instead we were celebrating this image. And what stuck with me from that moment so many years ago is this realization that photography has the power to inspire wonder and excitement and joy and passion for the natural world. And it's that feeling that has stuck with me all these years.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Also, you know, hearing what you how you thought you weren't going to be a storyteller, you had all these different visions for how you wanted to grow up and the role you wanted to play, but somehow you've managed to combine and connect the passion for this natural world and communicate it through storytelling, visual storytelling. As Caitlin said as well, we're very visual creatures, right? And then once you took this photo, how did you move forward in your photography journey?
Sure. I mean, I went to university still thinking I was going to be a scientist. That was my goal since I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And then one summer, while I was still a student, I got this job working for a photographer. And my job was to rappel into caves to look for these bugs so that the photographer who was working for National Geographic at the time, he wanted to document these new species. And I realized in working for him, I mean, you can see how much fun I'm having in this scene,
wow.
learning how to rappel into caves. I thought, wow, actually, what I wanted to do as a scientist, to explore the world, to learn about nature, to learn about science, I could do through photography. But at the same time, I was terrified of trying to pursue this uncharted path. You know, there's no guidebook of how to become a photographer.
Right.
I was working for this guy who had started his career with National Geographic. I could see a reference point, but I had no idea how to get there. Science was kind of more straightforward. Not that it's easy to become a scientist, but there are people you can follow, there are paths you can follow. You can go to graduate school. Photography seemed like this very scary unknown.
Right, almost this abstract concept to you, especially when you had that scientific pathway in mind. But how did you then take these opportunities and these experiences working for a National Geographic photographer to then becoming a National Geographic photographer? How did you make that transition?
Yeah, so even though I was afraid of this unknown path, I couldn't let go of this opportunity either. It was the adventure of a lifetime. I got to travel all over the world carrying his bags and learning new things, and so I knew I had to give it my best shot. And the first step of that was getting a National Geographic Explorer grant, and that gave me the opportunity to try my own ideas, and that introduced me to editors, and that's where I pitched my first story, which became a story for National Geographic on mind-controlling parasites, which I happened to pitch this idea at just the right time when a writer had proposed this story. They didn't think that this could be photographed, and I had a friend from the university who studied these parasites, and so she gave me this special access. And so I came in as a young photographer with very little experience, but with an idea that resonated with these editors, and they wanted to figure out how to translate this really fascinating story into images, and so I came in with the right experience working for photographers. I had an Explorer grant from National Geographic, which let me meet these editors, and then I had the right idea at the right time. And so what you're looking at here, this is a ladybug that's standing over the cocoon of a parasitic wasp, which has just emerged from its body, and that parasite has figured out how to control the mind of that ladybug and turn it into a zombie bodyguard. And so this ladybug is protecting the wasp from predators. And I'll go through a few examples of the other images that I've taken for National Geographic magazine. So another example of these mind-controlling parasites, this is a crab that's been infected by a parasitic barnacle. And this barnacle has the incredible power of transforming the body of the crab. So when it's infected, if the crab is male, the parasite turns it into a female. It forces it to grow an egg chamber. It lays its own eggs inside and then makes that feminized crab think it's pregnant so that it will care for the eggs of the parasite. And so all these tiny specks you see in the scene are actually tiny parasitic barnacle larvae that are emerging from this infected crab.
Wow.
And then this led to the next story on honeybees. And so I wanted to show how are scientists studying honeybees, especially in North America, honeybees are facing a lot of challenges. And so I wanted to show how are scientists trying to understand these challenges and tackle these challenges. So this is a photograph of an experiment to test the effect of pesticides on honeybees. They sedate them with carbon dioxide and they dose them with this chemical. And this is another experiment to understand how pesticides affect the memory of honeybees. And so they actually control the bees, they stick them in these little plastic chambers and expose them to floral scents, like a cinnamon-scented air, and then give them this little cotton swab dipped in sugar. And so that through that process, they can decode whether the bee remembers the smell, and they can essentially look at how that bee is learning and whether that learning is being affected by pesticides that are spread on crops.
Wow, these photographs are stunning, and I love the detail and the attention, but also the story. It's a different story. I don't know about all of you, but when I look at this bee photo, for example, I'm almost curious how I will see bees the next time I see bees, right? It's fascinating how you're taking almost these everyday passing tiny objects, insects everywhere, and bringing a new way to look at it. And through these still photographs. But I know you've also evolved a lot in your way of visual storytelling. So when did you, or when did you realize that there was more to explore than still photographs?
Just to address one of the points you came up with, like in terms of showing the world in a new way, I think that's the through line through all my photography. Like, how can I take a camera and use it to extend our ability to perceive the world around us? So with these images of tiny little insects, it's a lot about magnifying details, but there's a couple of other examples where, for example, this story on bats, these are not tiny creatures, but they move in ways that we can't perceive. They're moving too fast. in the middle of the night. And so I wanted to think about, can I use the power of photography to capture motion, for example? This is a long exposure of a bat flying through a flight cage, and that long exposure allows me to capture the shape of its wings as it flies through the cage. And this is an example of an experiment that shows how scientists study the echolocation of bats. This is a giant carnivorous bat, about a 1 meter wingspan, and it's a species that hunts rodents and birds and other bats. And so you can see it's honing in on this mouse on a cage. So this idea of magnifying details and capturing time and motion was a central part of this story on hummingbirds. And so this is showing how scientists use special devices like fog machines to trace the airflow around a hummingbird's wings, or using high-speed cameras to capture how they dry themselves off in the rain. And so, you know, these are images that show us things our eyes can't see, but the goal is to try to inspire people to look at the world around them in a new way. They're not so invisible that we would never be able to perceive this, but it hints at these kind of wonderful secrets that the world has to share with us. And this point you brought up about still photography, I mean, along the way, as I'm taking these images for a printed magazine, I'm also finding these opportunities and these stories that don't fit on a printed page. And so especially, for example, the story on honeybees, I kept a hive of honeybees in my home, in my garage, and I would go back there and I would watch the bees inside the hive, and I would see these different life stages. A baby bee looks like a totally alien creature. It looks kind of gross as this, almost like a little maggot. Kind of gooey, white, grubby looking thing. And yet the bee itself is this beautiful, furry creature that flies around. And I wanted to know, how does this transformation happen? And I can't really show this with a still image, but maybe through a video, I can tell the story of this transformation. And so I figured out, with the help of scientists, how to raise bees in front of a time-lapse camera. And so what I'll show next is this video that shows the first 21 days of a bee's life condensed into 60 seconds. What you see here is that egg of a honeybee just swirling around, swimming around inside the beehive. It's being fed this milky substance from the adult bees that allow it to feed and grow until this moment of transformation. This is when that larva becomes a pupa. That's the part where its head and its legs start to separate. And you can see that same process from above. You can actually see the parasites also running around inside the hive. And then this moment where the cells inside the bee, especially inside its head, start to reorganize. The color emerges in its eyes. And the last step of the process is its skin shrivels up and it sprouts hair.
And it's the first 21 days, right?
It's 3 weeks process condensed into 1 minute.
Wow. And where did this video, what did you do with this video in specific?
So this is a video that went out with the story of National Geographic. And this was a pivotal moment in my journey as a storyteller, because up until now, I have assumed that I had to let go of my childhood dream of becoming a scientist. I thought, okay, I've let that go. I'm going to become a photographer now. This is a different path. I can't do science as this. But when I released that video, I got messages from scientists that said, we learned new things from your video. We didn't know, for example, at the last few seconds, the bees are sticking out their tongues. They said, we didn't know they do that at such a young age. And that's the moment I realized, wait a minute, actually, I can contribute new understanding myself. I'm not just capturing the research of others. I'm not just translating the science of others. I can contribute new scientific understanding as well. And so that's part of what happened with my hummingbird project as well. I was there to take images for a magazine story, but I saw this opportunity to show the magic of their movement as well, and that could only be done through video. And so I was able to use a very specialty camera that shows the movement of hummingbirds 100 times slower than our eyes can see. And so I'm going to share this next video that shows these experiments and these movements with a high-speed camera. Let's roll this.
Yeah, that was definitely worth an applause. I was
Thank
here
you.
just feeling the room as well, and I could almost feel everybody not on the edge of their seats, but there was this emotion that you were able to bring, and hitting the sweet spot, especially of, you know, this, what the scientists were telling you, that they could pay attention to more detail than they never did before, but also for us as an audience, not really paying attention to hummingbirds that closely. I'm curious to know, Caitlin mentioned it again as well, the importance of knowing your audience. Other than the scientists, was there something else that you noticed of how different audiences received the different formats of the visual storytelling that you were pushing out?
No, that was the real lesson with this hummingbird video. I mean, the hummingbird video, the bee video, these were just kind of experiments. I wanted to see if I could capture this process, this movement. They were sort of side projects. They weren't my central assignment. That, you know, that you can't print a video in a magazine. But when I created those videos, I saw very different responses based on how I shared those videos. So the bee video, for example, it went out as part of a TED Talk. It became very popular online. It was very popular on YouTube, whereas the hummingbird video was not at all. And yet, when I showed them in person on a stage, the hummingbird video has much more impact. And I thought, what's going on here? You know, up until that point, I was simply just thinking about, you know, how do you light an image? How do you make that image itself impactful? But then when I started to see people responding to the video based on how I shared it, I thought there's another component here to think about in storytelling, not just how to make an individual image or a video beautiful or arresting or interesting, but how you share that content, what platform you use, whether it's on a stage, whether it's online, matters. How you package it matters. And so that really inspired me to think from the beginning, rather than as an experiment or as an accident, as an incidental side project. What if I took from the very beginning the intention to build a story and experiment with new ways of sharing that story? And that's how I approached the next project, which is on jellyfish.
Yes.
So instead of traveling through the world and visiting labs across the world, I wanted to actually become the jellyfish scientist myself. And so what I did with my assistant Mark is I converted my garage into a jellyfish lab, where I had my mother ship my old aquarium equipment that I had as a kid. I had 8 aquariums as a kid. I learned how to keep saltwater tanks, and so I converted that childhood passion into this jellyfish lab where we brought in jellyfish. We learned how to breed them in my garage. And the central thesis of this project was, can I change how people think about jellyfish and feel about jellyfish purely by inventing new ways to film them? And what I mean by that, here's an example of one of these technologies that I used, that I developed to try to film jellyfish in a new way. This is a special camera that's built onto a microscope stage, and we figured out how to send it into an aquarium through the front of the glass without the water leaking everywhere, so that I could create this immersive view of jellyfish. And so I'll show you kind of what we were able to capture. This is kind of a close-up view of this baby jellyfish's life. And so I'm gonna take you through the secret world of jellyfish. Let me show you. What you see here, all these funny little, they look like anemones.
Yeah.
They're actually baby jellyfish. Jellyfish start their life attached to the seafloor.
Okay.
In this case, they're attached to mussel shells, and they hang out there with their tentacles, just grabbing whatever animals float by, and they stay in that little form like a little tree underwater for months and months until the right signals appear in the water, whether it's temperature or salinity. When they get that cue from their environment, they start reorganizing their body, just like that honeybee. And in this case, they pinch their body into this series of discs. It's almost like a stack of tires. Each one of those discs then grows its own set of arms and becomes a separate jellyfish. So this polyp is cloning itself into a whole stack of jellyfish that are all connected, and one by one, those jellyfish break free and start their life in the open ocean.
Wow.
And so what you see here, this is called an ephyra that's cloning itself and breaking free, and that's when it starts to become this thing that we're more familiar with. And so over the weeks, that little ephyra pulses, it feeds, it grows, and transforms into this creature that we know.
Who would have known? And this is all filmed in your converted garage.
Yes, this is a little aquarium about this big,
Wow.
where I'm trying to capture this sort of secret process.
So not only a National Geographic photographer, you converted your garage, you became a jellyfish scientist. And I'm curious what happened, what did you do with this footage? We talked about, the ladybug, the hummingbird. What did you do with the jellyfish photographs and videos?
The lesson I took from this project, this is a creature that we think of as being so simple. Some people think they're beautiful, some people think they're terrible. But nobody thinks that part about jellyfish. We think of them as just, what is there to see here? What is there to learn? But in reality, when you look, this little structure, the notch you see along the edge of its body, inside that notch is this special structure that is in fact a gypsum crystal that the jellyfish secretes that lives on a bed of sensory hairs. And so as the jellyfish swims, that gypsum crystal rolls around, triggering these sensory hairs, and that tells the jellyfish what direction it's pointing. And that's actually how our own inner ear works. And so as you learn more about this creature, you realize there's so much hidden complexity and beauty in even such a simple thing. So if this creature has that much complexity, what else are we missing in the world? And so back to your question of how did I share this? Again, it can't be printed in a magazine. And I wanted to go beyond just putting this on a YouTube video or making a documentary film. I thought this question of how you share this content matters. And so to explore that, I actually worked with the Science Museum to create an immersive exhibit. And so what this exhibit did is it took this video, I showed just a portion just now of the full secret life of jellyfish, and we took that video and we presented it in multiple forms in the same space. And so this first space you're seeing we call the jellyfish opera. It has the full life cycle of a jellyfish with no narration, no text, no description, no explanation, purely as a sensory experience. But you leave that space and then you feel like you're more like in a science museum where we take the life cycle and we break it down into its components. We use these graphic descriptions and illustrations to explain what you're seeing. And that's one format. You've got the opera, you've got the explanation. We've got another theater where I have a conversation with a journalist and we talk and narrate over the video to explain that. We have another section where it's an interactive screen where kids can choose what part of the life cycle they can see, and they can see how a jellyfish eats. And with all of those digital components, in the center of all that are live jellyfish tanks. And the thesis here is, can this combination of different storytelling formats, explanatory, sensory, living jellies, can those synergize to create a connection to this, weird, simple creature in a way that any one of those formats alone would not be able to achieve? That was the experiment. I didn't know the answer to. I didn't know what part of this, of the 5 components, would be the most compelling, the most engaging. And so I wanted to test out this concept. I wanted to test it in a real place where you could watch people move through this and see, what are they looking at? What are they curious about? They have their own agency to choose where to put their eyeballs. Where do they choose to put it? Let me give them this menu and
the
see
whole
where they
experience.
land.
Was there one, just out of curiosity, was there one element or one format that you felt people naturally gravitating to in the way of how we like to consume stories the most?
Interestingly, I think I was most obsessed with the jellyfish opera. I wanted to create the sensory experience. That's what I thought was going to be the most important. In fact, the thing that people responded to the most was a conversation where there was a human that could be there to translate the experience. But the most memorable part of this kind of experimental exhibit, there was this moment where a family came into the theater and there was a young child and parents, and there was no place to sit, and so the parents decided to leave, but the kid wanted to stay. He's probably 5 years old. And he walked into the center of the theater and plopped himself down, and the parents were like, okay, well, we want to go, what's going on? And so the mom walked in and tried to pick him up to leave. And he started kicking and screaming and kicking and screaming, and so she left him alone, and he was just watching. And they'd walked into the middle of the video, and so then the video ended. And so the kid got up and walked towards the exit, and as soon as the video started again, he didn't see that part. So he ran back to the middle and sat back down, and the parents just gave up. They're like, we're not going to be able to tear this kid away. And I thought, that little kid just made the last 4 years of my life that it took to make this video worth it. That is the kind of quality of attention that I want to cultivate. Can I inspire someone to look that intently, to pay that attention in such a noisy, distracting world? To be able to reach someone like that was like, this is my mission. How do I create stories and share them in a way that inspire this sense of wonder that I hope opens that kid's mind to all the other possibilities in the world?
It's funny, listening to you, that little boy almost reminds me of when you were talking and telling us about your childhood, about this wonder that you had about the natural world. And similarly as well, growing up on Bali, for me personally, there was that curiosity, right? And again, storytelling allows us to grow, hold on to that curiosity and hold on to that wonder into our adult life. But how has that experience of watching that little boy, refusing to go home, how has that shaped the next chapter of your work as a photographer?
That was a transitional moment for me to do this experiment in an exhibit and to test out new ideas. I thought, this is what I want to do from now on, is to experiment with new forms of storytelling. And so that inspired me to start my new project called Wonder Lab, and I'll show a little clip that gives you a sense of what this new project and this new space is. Here's a little clip, and I can explain more after.
For me to be able to create space for young scientists or photographers who, like me, don't quite fit into the bucket of a scientist or photographer, but know that there's something at the intersection of science and storytelling where they want to be. What I'm trying to create is evoking a sense of wonder, and I want to do that in a place in which I'm iterating and experimenting just like a science lab would.
So what I've done is I've created a space. I basically moved out of my garage into an old ketchup factory in Berkeley. And this is now an experimental space where I can continue trying to innovate in my own storytelling. This is me photographing a chicken egg, but also create a space that I can collaborate with scientists and also bring in classrooms and young storytellers to inspire them to develop new storytelling techniques themselves. So it's one part biology lab, it's one part photo studio, and one part classroom. So to give you an example of some of the workshops that I've led, this is with a group of National Geographic explorers just a couple of weeks ago, teaching some of the lessons that I've learned along the way in how to explore visual storytelling. This is Gab Meja, actually another National Geographic explorer based in the Philippines.
Part of the eye is it? Okay, let's make it large. Live, okay. Live
And he had this idea of like, I want to know what my eye looks like. Can we devise a way of photographing my eye? And they came up with this awesome system just on the fly. And I thought, this is the kind of energy that I want to be able to inspire. Can I create a space to share this process of exploration and experimentation to kind of invent new ways of looking at the world.
Yeah, and normalizing the way we can sit and ask those big questions to begin exploring and find the stories we want to tell. I want to make sure that we have some time also for the audience to ask questions. So Anand, are you ready to engage in a few questions with the audience, or?
Not quite. I just wanted to have this last moment to talk about kind of what I hope to achieve with WonderLab. So yes, one part of the goal is to create new images and to think about new ways of sharing those images, whether it's in an immersive exhibit, if it's online, if it's in print. That's kind of my own journey. But I also, beyond that, I want to be able to share this way of seeing the world. And I think the way to do that in the most powerful way is to connect with educators and to be able to share these tools with educators who can then bring their classrooms into this world themselves. And so the little video clips you showed from WonderLab, that we showed, those are actually part of a series called I Wonder that I'm creating with the education team at National Geographic to share with teachers alongside curriculum so that they can access the kinds of journey that we're going through in WonderLab and be able to recreate that in their own classrooms. And unfortunately, right now, those resources are only in English, but the vision is to be able to share that with teachers who can share that with their own students. And so we actually host high school field trips and school field trips at the lab. This is our first field trip earlier this year, where we gave students cameras and taught them how to use those cameras as tools for exploration. So the last video I'll share today before we go to the Q&A is a little bit from this field trip. And for those of you who took my slow looking workshop yesterday, you'll notice some similarities. We essentially taught a slow looking workshop using cameras as tools for observation. So we'll play this clip and then we can throw it back to the audience. Here you go. There you go, there you go, there you go, there you go.
Hello. Do you know yet?
Perfect, perfect. Just pop it right in there. Excellent.
I did that, guys.
Excellent. Okay.
I did
Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, excuse me, guys. I'm gonna give you a camera here. Okay, so your next job, you drew 3 parts. Your next job is to photograph those 3 parts. So each of these flashes is pretty simple. You'll see a little button that's plus and minus. You just press those to make it brighter or darker if your image is too bright. Or the other way to do it is to just loosen the little arm and you can move it forward or back or above or below. But the goal is going to be to take a photo of each of those parts that you first drew. Once you've done that, if you see other things you want to take pictures of, once you've gotten those first 3, take a picture of whatever catches your interest. Background, you kind of
We've been coming fast.
wow, just chugging along here. Let me try to help you out.
And it needs to finish up in like 10 minutes.
You okay on timing? Cool.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Take
Do you need help taking anything down? So essentially that's my theory for how to change the world, is inspire people to look at the world around them with fresh attention.
I love it. I love everything that I'm hearing, and also the power of classrooms and education and unlocking this power and potential within each of us to be a storyteller. So thank you for sharing Wonder Lab. And I'm going to ask for the lights to go on and for the first question from the audience. Do we have any questions for Anand about storytelling, about his work? We have a question right there that I can see in the middle, and we have some mic runners. Yes, keep your hand up so we can identify you in the crowd. And if you would just like to introduce yourself with your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Swit, and first of all, really thank you for your presentation. You know, you can hear how excited my voice is. You know, throughout the whole presentation, just really like my heart was beating so hard, because for me, you know, I grew up in the countryside of Thailand, and my dad has these stacks of National Geographic book. And you know, I didn't know so much. I just looked through images, and through this presentation, it somehow made me realize, you know, I got a scholarship to study abroad, travel around, and become a photographer because of these kind of images. You know, and my question to you would be, maybe my life is not so explorative or, you know, adventurous, but is there any way for a photographer like me to get involved in this, you know, powerful storytelling like you do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So how to get involved? I think the first step is to find that subject, that story that most sparks your own curiosity, that engages your own motivation. That's the first step to be able to take what can be a very difficult and scary journey that will take a lot of time and a lot of effort. You need some source of motivation, so some question that's burning that you want to know the answer to. And then in terms of actually the mechanics of how to work with National Geographic, the best doorway in is the door I took through becoming an explorer, which is how Malati got involved with National Geographic too. And so there's a grant program that you can learn more about on nationalgeographic.org's website, and by pitching an idea and getting a grant, that's the best way to translate that passion and curiosity with the world to become part of this broader community of explorers and to start your journey there.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for a couple more questions. Would anyone like to ask a question? Over there, all the way on the left. Oh.
Thank you so much. My name is Walavit Lapanikorn. I'm working for TBL, Thai Beverage Logistics. I have the question. My question is, your work, your jobs is about natural, physical natural, right? So, is there any connection about the physical that you work, connection to the soul, like a love, something like this? What do you think? You know what I mean?
Yeah, a bit. So, I mean, I think in terms of how you connect to your passion is a core part of the process, I think, is trying to understand, like, you know, as I was telling these stories, I was sharing the facts about, okay, this is how this parasite works, or this is what this bat looks like. And there was a moment along my journey where I realized, you know what, my goal here is not to share a bunch of facts about the science. My goal is to share a feeling, you know, an emotional response. And in some ways, telling the information in the context expands the potential to have an emotional reaction to that. And the goal at the end is to share a sense of feeling, and the emotion, you know, Caitlin talked about different emotions you can touch on in storytelling. I think that first one she mentioned, awe or wonder, is the emotion that I find the most powerful because of its ability to open ourselves to new ways of seeing or understanding the world. And so that's, even though there's all of this kind of direct and sometimes kind of literal scientific facts in the work that I do. Throughout that whole process, what I'm trying to access underneath it is an emotional awakening and connection. So yeah, thank you for that question. We have one more kind of
Same
on
hand,
the
I think all the way
far
yes,
left
at the
there.
far
Yeah.
left. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. First of all, love your speech, two of you and the one that are Zoom with us in the first place. I'm Kirati from Spotlight. We do the business and economic news. So my question, I have two questions basically. The first one is that I love every bit of your work, but they seem to be very, very professional. So as me and many other people, we have story to tell, but we don't have all the right equipment. So how should we start? This is my first one. And the second one is that apart from just the beauty of the nature, can we tell other stories? For me, basically, I'm from the business and economic side. Can we tell story through pictures or videos that also change the world, make the real impact in terms of business and economics? That's my two questions.
Really interesting questions. And I think I shared sort of stories about the natural world because that's my passion. That's what I grew up most curious about. And so for me, the science comes first and the photography is a tool for sharing that passion and that curiosity. That is by no means saying that only stories about nature or science or the natural world are important. That happens to be my journey because that's my passion. But I think you can absolutely take whatever story you're passionate about and use the same approach that Caitlin talked about. You can hear the kind of approach that I took, that sense of starting. I started just trying to do my job, doing what National Geographic asked me to do. And it was the process of reflecting on that and seeing what worked and what didn't that has driven my journey. And so I don't think you need to start with the fanciest cameras and the most expensive technology. Start with what you have, and if you can develop that process of reflection, that is what I think can drive your path forward. So I say, okay, even if I only have the most basic camera or a phone, start with that and say, what can I do in my own backyard, in my own neighborhood? And what in that speaks to me? What in that inspires that reaction in your family or your friends or your audience? And you can use that as your first lesson to say, okay, I didn't use the fanciest technology to take that first picture of a snake, but it was this beginning of my journey to see, this is the kind of reaction that is meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And I think you can apply that same process to whatever story using whatever tools you have.
And I think just to add to that, but also to come to the closing of this session with National Geographic on impact storytelling, don't underestimate the power of a conversation. That's oftentimes where you find your voice as a storyteller. And that's the most important lesson, to stay authentic, to hold on to childhood dreams of wonder of the marine biology and nature around you. I know I've learned a lot from this conversation with you, Anand. Thank you so much for sharing your lessons and your insights with us today. Let's please hear it one more time for Anand Varma.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Kindly remain on the stage. Please remain on the stage as we're going to have a photo session next. Thank you so much, Kun Melati and Kun Anand. Now we're going to have this first shot, just the two of you, and then after this we're going to invite our executives to join you. เป็นยังไงกันบ้างคะกับเซสชันนี้นะคะหลายท่านเองก็ชื่นชอบ National Geographic นะคะก็ได้ฟังเรื่องราวของ storytelling นะคะในการทำงานของเขาค่ะ and I'm pretty sure that all of you would agree with me that National Geographic's art of storytelling serves as a testament to the transformative power of narratives, and by connecting audience emotionally. Please still join us on the stage. We're going to invite some of our executives to join both of you. ใครขอเรียนเชิญคณะผู้บริหารนะคะได้ขึ้นมาร่วมถ่ายภาพกับเราด้วยค่ะ By connecting audience emotionally, National Geographic encourages actions to protect Earth's delicate ecosystem, and the stories can change and inspire collective efforts towards a sustainability future. And that is our aim. That's why we are here at the Sustainability Expo 2023 to raise awareness of sustainability development. Thank you. That was a wonderful session by National Geographic Impact Storytelling. Another big round of applause. ขอเสียงปรบมือดังๆอีกสักครั้งหนึ่งนะคะ Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful stories. Thank you, Melati. Thank you, Anand, and also from Kun Caitlin Yarnal from our VTR.